Hello, and welcome back to Hello Animal Talks. I'm Jennie Worthington. Today, I'm welcoming my guest, Janice Hannah, who works for the International Fund for Animal Welfare as their campaign manager for Canada. She works particularly with the Indigenous communities and NGOs in North America to build humane and sustainable programs to improve the health and welfare of the people and the animals around them, particularly the dogs. So welcome, Janice Hannah. Thank you for being on my program.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to let the guests know, Jan's in Canada doesn't have great bandwidth for video, so I will be the only one on screen. She's going to talk to us about what she's doing. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved with the International Fund for Animal Welfare.
Well, it's a 30-year journey at this point, so it goes back actually a long, long way. When I was in university, I was doing my bachelor in wildlife biology, and one of my professors, who I didn't know at the time did this, was actually director of the International Marine Mammal Association. The International Marine Mammal Association worked on marine mammal issues, so whales and seals and dolphins, and mostly on issues related to interactions with people. And the organization did research and education. And when I graduated, I worked in environmental consulting for a year, and then I ended up doing a project on captivity of whales and dolphins and their survivorship. And I was brought into IMA under my past professor, Dave Levine. And that contract turned into a full-time position. And we were always funded by the International Fund for Animal Welfare, but we retained an arm's length relationship. And that was because the founding campaign for IFAW was the seal hunt. And so a lot of our work at IMA was focused on the seal hunt. And then over time, IMA was brought fully into the IFAW family, and we dropped our name. And at that point, I branched out from working on just marine mammals to, at that point, we were doing emergency response, so fires, floods, Katrina, for example, and I branched into companion animal work. And that is the long-winded journey from 22 years ago.
Wow, that's pretty diverse.
Yeah, it was really diverse.
Yeah, what a great journey, though.
Mm-hmm. And so lucky, too. It turns out, and you interviewed my colleague previously, Cheryl Fink. Mm-hmm. She was also a student of Dave Levine. And it turns out it was a small organization, and all of us had gone to the University of Guelph, and all of us had had Dave as a prof.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. What a legacy for him.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because for anybody who's listening who is in university and who wants to pursue a career, whether it's in biology or genetics or whatever they're looking in, you know, there are those opportunities that your prof is your prof, so you don't necessarily know what they're doing on the side. Mm-hmm. But, you know, there are always those opportunities to find out what profs are doing and if there are ways to volunteer for your professor or find out what they're doing and maybe ultimately get a job.
That's fantastic advice. What drew you to the work that you're doing right now that put you on that track? Did you have a particular experience that sort of opened your eyes to an issue that was happening you wanted to get involved with?
I did a little bit, and it was also somewhat circumstantial. So I had done responses for Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Gus, and it was just amazing, especially Katrina, because as most people know, when Katrina happened in New Orleans, there were not the systems and processes in place to take care of the number of animals that were separated from their people. So that was for anybody who was involved in that, the organizations in the States and those of us who went down from Canada, it was an unbelievable learning experience. And certainly regulations and processes have come out of Katrina. So that was, I guess, when I moved over a little bit into companion animals, when I started doing emergency response. And then at that point, we had opened an IFA office in Ottawa in Canada. So we still had IMA in Guelph, but then we opened this IFA office. And so IFA started looking at other program opportunities. And when we looked for opportunities, there was this space that wasn't being filled and a need of Indigenous people to have help managing their dog populations. So IFA did start a program, and I went up to the communities to help with the vet clinic in that second year, and then was asked to run the program from there. So that was about 22 years ago when I started doing that. And when IFA began what is now the Northern Dogs Project, the objective was to keep dogs with their owners and help owners to provide for their dogs responsibly and to provide for the welfare of their dogs, but also to help the band, so basically the municipality, to also help develop programs for them so that they had dog management programs set up and they could also support owners. So we've always worked at the individual owner end of things and then also at the band end of things. And the objective again is to keep dogs with their people in the communities. And what we do, it's always been a multi-pronged community-based program because you're looking not at just the problems and sticking band-aids on those problems. You're looking at the root causes. Right. Why are there these dog problems in communities? And you're getting at those root problems. And that's why you need that comprehensive approach, because there's not one reason that there are dog issues in communities. There are multiple reasons. So you have to get at them with multiple tools.
And so what kind of problems were you seeing? What were the people dealing with?
If you would go in and talk to, well, first off, most of the dogs, well, all the dogs at that point actually lived free roaming. So what a lot of people call stray dogs, they are not stray dogs. They are free roaming dogs. And most of the dogs around the world actually live as free roaming dogs. So the dogs in the communities in which IFA works, they are free roaming, which absolutely says nothing about their ownership. It just means that they are not tied, they're not behind fences, and they're not locked in houses or crates. They are literally free roaming. So they are able to make their own choices. They pick their dog friends, they follow their owners, they go down to the lake if they want to swim, but they are all owned. They know where they live. They know who their people are. They love their people. They watch for their people. And so what I would hear from community members is that they had too many dogs. That is still also the most common complaint that you will hear from communities. And you have to dig deeper than that, because when I would start off the conversation by asking what the problems were, and I would hear over and over again that there were too many dogs, but I would ask how many dogs are there, nobody actually knew. So I knew then that this wasn't really a too many dog issue. It was probably a dog behavior issue. So things like dogs chasing cars, dogs fighting when it was mating season, dogs pooping on other people's properties. So, again, digging at those root causes to figure out what the real problems were, because you have to be able to really work at those real problems. So we did provide vet clinics. So that the objective of the vet clinics was to spay and neuter, so that dogs were not having unwanted puppies. But you also got rid of those spring behaviors, intact males who are fighting with other intact males for access to females.
Right.
And that increases the safety because, if you can picture it, if you own a female dog and she's living outside and she's on your porch and she's in heat, there's 10 intact dogs who are sitting down waiting for access to that female. And when you come out of your house or when your kids come out of their house to go to school, they have to go through past your female in heat and then past those intact males. So it's really a safety issue.
Yeah.
So we were getting at the health and welfare of the dogs, but we were also getting at improving the safety for people. And then we vaccinate. So you're looking at communities who are, living amongst wild animals that can carry rabies. So rabies, even though it is a dog issue, and most people who get rabies around the world, it's from their domestic dog, but their dog has to get rabies from a wild animal first. So that again gets at that dog health perspective, but it also gets at the people health perspective. So that's that one health perspective. And by creating that stable, vaccinated, dewormed, spayed, neutered population, you can start to get at the numbers, but also the health of the dogs. And these people don't have access to vet services. I mean, vet services in some of these places, the closest vet is 12 hours away.
Oh,
and those, distance isn't just the barrier. Cost is a barrier. Transportation is a barrier. And even, when I first started providing the clinics, people had never lived with a spayed and neutered population. They had always lived with an intact population, and they had dealt with those behaviors and consequences of living with dogs who were mating. So there was a little bit of that information. There was a lot of that information sharing where you're sharing the benefits of spaying and neutering your dog, because they had had to deal with dog issues without access to information sharing, access to veterinary services, any community engagement. So really getting the municipality or the band involved in helping them, really providing information about what was going on with their dogs. We would see porcupine quills and hit by car injuries, and we would see mange. And so just really helping owners to understand what their dog had and how we could assist their dog.
And how are they dealing with the problem before that?
There was a lot of lethal population control. So what I mean by that, and you read about it in the news, but historically, when people lived on the land, they had working dogs.
Right.
And so dogs had value. You took care of your dog because it was like taking care of your car or anything that you have now. You take care of the things that you need to work for you.
Right.
So the dogs had roles, but people lived individually, and they had, let's say they had 2 dogs. Let's say they had a team. Let's say they had 10 dogs, but the dogs worked during the day, and then they would tie them up during the night. So you didn't necessarily have that free roaming.
Right.
Type of lifestyle, and you had fewer dogs congregating in one place. And then when the government took them off their land and settled them into communities, people brought their dogs with them. So all of a sudden you had way more dogs, and they weren't necessarily working in the same way that they were historically. So even just the sheer number now of dogs without jobs, to oversimplify it, but dogs without jobs.
Right.
And then so you had mating. These dogs didn't necessarily have the same value anymore, so they weren't necessarily taken care of to the same degree because they weren't working. And so you had lethal measures such as culling or drowning puppies, things like that. Yeah. And measures that make total sense in the context. And I know that for a lot of people it's shocking and it's hard to hear, but when you actually picture it, when you close your eyes and you picture it, you're talking about people who have not been introduced to vet services and have no access to vet services, and who managed to manage their dog populations in a way, really in the only way that they had.
Right. And they were put in a circumstance that was beyond their control.
Totally.
Yeah.
And very quickly and very different, right? It wasn't that this was something that people chose to do, to come off their land, and they did it slowly, and they found ways to live with dogs in a new way. It was like, you're off, and here you are now.
Right. And everybody's together, and everybody's very close to each other. The dogs all have access to each other where they might not have before.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think too, one of the things that I talk about with vet services, which is again, not a solution, it's a tool, but it is a valuable tool. The unfortunate thing about it is you don't actually build skills and capacity in the community with vet services, because vet services are always provided by external service providers.
Right.
So we come in, and we do things to your dogs and then we leave, but we don't leave you with any new skill development. Certainly through relationshiping and information sharing, we do, but there, you have to be really careful not to create a dependency in any of this work, because what we're trying to do is help communities to build programs that work for them in their unique context, not bring the way that we live with dogs or the way that we work with dogs into communities. It's how do you live with them and how can we help you to live healthy and safe in ways that work. But the interesting thing too about vet services is the way that we own dogs today, we do, is very different from the way my father owned dogs or my grandfather owned dogs. But we have grown with the vet industry in our own culture. And the vet industry has grown with us. And it has grown with us over 50 years, from when vetting was very practical. Dogs were free roaming here as well. And what we're asking a lot of Indigenous people to do is, okay, vet services are now here at this place where you are expected to spay and neuter, brush your dog's teeth, provide them with anti-parasites. And they haven't had time to grow with vet services either. You know? So there's just a lot of understanding the context of the communities in which we partner and really meeting them where their needs are, not taking in our ideas.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Otherwise, it wouldn't be sustainable.
And it would also be introducing a huge change, you know, that expectation that, oh, today you own your dogs like you do. Oh, but then we come in and we're going to push our way. And that, you know, we expect this to happen within a year. And when we come back next year, all your dogs will be living inside and sleeping on your bed. And that's just not realistic.
Okay, so you go into these areas and provide the vet services, and that vet service does not stay in that area. Do you go back to visit areas on a regular basis, the same area, on like say once a year or something like that?
Yeah. And as I say to people, the vet services are one tool. They are no more important than any of the other tools. So for instance, other tools include legislation and implementation. So dog bylaws, helping communities to write job descriptions, hire the right person, write their bylaws, help their person to share those bylaws out, support people to change the way they're owning dogs, and then ultimately enforce. There's education. So we have a specific First Nations education package that was developed by First Nations for First Nations learners. There's helping people to write grants. There's capacity building exercises. We run a workshop that builds community engagement, but also helps communities to understand their particular dog issues and then decide how they want to build a program. There's rehoming. So there are dog relinquishments and rehoming. IFAW does not do any dog pickups. So what I mean by that is the band will ask a lot of groups now, not the bands that we work with, but other bands, because of course there are over 600 First Nations communities in Canada, but they will ask groups to come in and pick up dogs. So basically a dog roundup, and IFAW does not endorse those. It's disrespectful to owners. So we will only take owner relinquishments. So if an owner wants to relinquish their dog, it gives me the opportunity to have a conversation with them. Is there something that I can help you with so that you keep your dog? And is there a reason that you're getting rid of your dog? And then ultimately, if they still need to relinquish their dog, I can find out, you know, the behavior of their dog and the energy level of their dog so that I can find the right foster and the right home for that dog. So it has, and it's been challenging through COVID because the communities have been in lockdown. And so I did reach out. I haven't been able to provide vet services or go into the schools or run any of the meetings or do any of the capacity building in the community. So I did ask them what would help them during COVID. And they have done a lot of relinquishment. And what myself and my volunteers have been doing is driving 12 hours up to meet somebody from the community who drives out with the dogs with the signed relinquishments and meets us, and then we bring the dogs back here, and then they go into foster and they get adopted out.
Wow. And you say you had a lot of that going on during COVID?
Yes.
Why
Yeah, because
yeah.
Well, without 2 vet clinics, so we didn't have one this past spring, and we didn't have one the spring before, so it's actually been 3 years.
Wow.
So that's a lot of intact dogs making more dogs.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do start to see what you'll see is, again, the community's finding ways to deal with the number of dogs. So what my data shows is that people are keeping a lot more males and relinquishing females. So you just start to get these natural, practical ways that communities try to deal with the dog issues that they're dealing with. And the idea behind that is then we don't have to deal with puppies. Now, the only problem with that is when you're skewing your sex ratio in the communities, sex ratio is naturally 1-to-1, essentially. Yeah. And now your sex ratio might be 3-to-1. So in fact, when the next heat cycle comes, instead of having 10 males waiting on a female, you can have 15 males waiting on a female.
Right.
Just by sheer number.
Yeah. It's a problem. It's a situation that can quickly get out of control.
Yeah, I think it's been good for me because I do spend so much of my time. I've worked training other groups how to work effectively and contextually with First Nations communities. So again, really working on having the right people do this work in the right way. And so so many groups think that spay neuter and dog removal are the answer. So I spend a lot of my time saying that is not true. Those are tools. What we're really talking about is a long-term behavior change. We are asking owners to change the way they live with their dogs. So that's behavior change. That's generational. And then we're throwing in these tools. But I will tell you that having not run a vet clinic, a spay-neuter clinic in 2 years, and having the conversations that I'm having with community members, it does show you just what you said, that the numbers really do increase. And again, we have now created this place where community members every year can come and bring their dogs, and now they want that service. So, and that's part of behavior change, right? You offer something, at first we had to sell its value, but then over time it just shows its value practically. And then, we have this behavior change where I don't need to, I don't have those conversations with owners anymore, usually about the benefits of spay and neuter. They want it done.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell me about what are some of the other teachings that you do for behavior change?
Behavior change, it's a lot of, so for instance, that First Nations education pack that I was talking about. So that's First Nation curriculum developers talked to First Nations community members across Canada, got a lot of historical traditional dog stories and dog stories for now. And it was about asking how they wanted to teach their youth about dogs, how they used to live with dogs and how they need to live with dogs now. So that is a 6-part hands-on education program. It's called Living in a Good Way with Dogs, Our Stories, and it's available online at the IFAW website, but I do also have hard copies. And that is, again, getting into schools and talking to kids and getting them to understand how dogs used to be owned by their grandparents and their great-grandparents when they used to live on the land, and then the expectations of how to own them now. But it's said from that First Nations perspective, and so it's said very differently from the way. And so, what you're doing with that is you're getting that information sharing in so that kids, they are at the forefront of change. So you get that information in, and then the way that they own dogs is slightly different, and the way that their kids in the future own dogs is slightly different, and you're getting that behavior change right from there. And then legislation and, bylaws. A lot of communities don't have bylaws, dog bylaws, so it's helping them develop those bylaws. And again, once you get those in and get the right person in, then you are asking, supporting, and ultimately enforcing the way people own dogs. So again, that's a behavior change.
Okay, so how do they own dogs now? Like, what are their priorities with dogs now? Do you see like a general trend, or is each community different?
No, there's a general trend. Most of the dogs are not working dogs. Some of them are used for hunting. Certainly in the communities I'm in, Goose Break is the traditional holiday. So they are used at that time of year for hunting. For the rest of the time, they are family members or they are playmates for children, but they are not working dogs the way that people think that they are working dogs. And puppies are very accessible in communities, whether in the communities that IFAW partners with or other communities across Canada. So there tends to be, puppies are quite high value and quite accessible. So you tend to have a high turnover. You can have a high turnover of dogs. So dogs are kept until they're maybe a year and a half or 2 years. And then people will get a new puppy because puppies are cute.
Wow. And what do they do with the old dogs?
They end up coming out of the community. And so, I keep track of those ages. So we're starting to see that median age is changing and people are keeping dogs for longer, because what you're trying to do is take those dogs out of that nuisance lifestyle that they seem to be caught in, where people consider them a nuisance, and then increase their value so people keep them and they can live safely with them.
That's so interesting.
It is really interesting. It's really interesting, and I'm sure that you find this in so many of the conversations that you have. But, behavior change is really at the base of so much of the work that we do in animal welfare and conservation. Yeah. Because there isn't a lot of space anymore for animals on this planet. So you can't just save animals if you don't have the space and people aren't living with them in a way that is safe for them. Because when people don't live safely with animals, whether they're wild animals or domestic, it tends not to end well for the animals. No, yeah, it's usually the animal that suffers. Wow, I'm so amazed at the whole puppy thing. Like where they reach a certain age. Well, and again, and it's really interesting, because if you look at the puppy craze that has happened through COVID in your world, because it's happened in my world, the absolute puppy craze, and people going to backyard breeders for it, people getting puppies wherever they could get puppies. They didn't care if they were healthy or not. When you picture walking down the road and passing a litter of puppies that comes up to you and nobody tells you not to take that puppy home, we would all do the same thing. Oh, absolutely. They're so cute. Yeah, absolutely. They're so cute. And at that point, when they're puppies, they're also not engaging in any of those behaviors that are nuisance behaviors. They're not chasing cars yet. They're not packing up on females. They're not doing any of those things. So if you can stay in that phase and just keep owning a dog that isn't a bother, that is a plaything for your child and brings joy, then I think we would all do the same thing. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Yeah, absolutely. I think we all would, for sure. Wow, I had never thought of that. Yeah, and we have services, and including, we all have bylaws too where we live, that keep our behaviors. Number one, we have access to services, so we can take our dog to daycare, we can get the dog spayed or neutered, or we can go to the vet or the groomer or whatever. So they always smell, this is another thing, those details. Our dogs smell good. We brush them, we get them groomed. Ergo, they come into our house. Ergo, they sleep on our bed. But when you're looking at a lot of dogs who are free roaming, they grow their winter coat, they roll in dead fish, and then spring comes and they start to shed their coat, but they're not groomed. So then they get stinky, and then they're swimming, and then they get hot and they're stinky, so they don't come in the house. You know, you can see the connections of how it has taken us 50 years to bring dogs into our house and onto our beds. And so we're looking at communities who in 50 years may be at that same place if they have access to the same things that we do.
Right, right. Now, do you see a change in the community itself when the dog populations are taken care of?
Yes.
And like it's sort of like a ripple effect where it brings everything up to a higher, nicer level?
It can, but it can also, when you're in a transition period of how you do something now or how you historically did something, and when you're moving, there are people who are along that continuum doing different things. So there are people who have dogs who live in their house. There are people who have dogs who are tied. There are people who have dogs who are free roaming. And so you can get that sort of messy middle where now you have people who want to walk their dog on a leash, let's say, but they can't walk their dog on a leash because when they walk their dog on a leash, all the free roaming dogs run up to their dog. So then you have them saying, I want all the dogs tied. But you have people who say, that's not a life for a dog to be tied. It's not natural. It's only natural for a dog to be free roaming. So that's that, you know, you can see the whole continuum of what people think and then how they own their dogs. So yeah, we're a little bit in the messy middle.
Yeah.
A little bit in the messy middle. And it's hard. It's hard to, going back to that leash example, and you know, I'm not saying that's utopia, but it's really stark when I do hear community members say, my dog lives inside and we do all those things with my dog, but it's not safe for my dog to be outside anymore, and it's not safe for my kids to walk my dog. And again, it just is, you know, it's all those details that are fascinating. You know, I work with some groups and they're real proponents of free roaming dogs in the communities. And they always ask me, do you think it's realistic? And I say, I'm not sure it is. And I always use the example, I have 6 dogs at home. They're all from the communities. And if I were to let my 6 dogs free roam, I'm pretty sure my neighbors wouldn't like it. And if my neighbor let their dog free roam, like if we were a free roaming community, we would still have those fractions. People would still say, I don't want your dog pooping on my lawn. Somebody else would say, I don't care. Your dog poops on my lawn and my dog poops on your lawn. So you can just see how, again, it's humans play a really, really big part in living with dogs, like a really, 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 really big part. Change is hard. And it's not just change is hard to get people to do things, but change is hard when you're moving along or you're moving up that ladder, and some people will get there fast. There's always those people, you know, those people who are those first uptakers. They're at the top of the ladder, and then you have those slow people down at the bottom, let's say. And until everybody's basically at the same place, it can be difficult.
Do you have people that actively resist these changes? I would imagine that would be part of the whole spectrum as well.
Yeah, I would say that's more so in the community. And I always say that to the communities, you know, we're here to help. I'm here to help, and we're going to do this development together. And I have experience and tools, and I can support you and help you in this way. But the majority of the work happens day to day. And you live there, it's your community, it will be your work. And I think for people who move into the dog job, which is a relatively new position in the community, I think it can be really hard for them. Communities are small. You're dealing with your family members. You're dealing with your friends. You're dealing with power dynamics. So that's just the politics, right, of living in a small community. And then when you're trying to embark on major change and asking people to do things differently, I think that's really difficult for community members.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's hard for humans in general. You said there's a dog job?
Yep, there's a dog job. So the dog job always fell under public safety. and the public safety officer in the communities I work in didn't have a lot of time for dogs and didn't have a lot of interest. Now, the communities I work in have an animal control officer.
Wow.
Yeah. And that also, that's, you don't necessarily get the right person for the job right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up maybe going through some people before you end up at that place where you have somebody who really wants that job and who has that nice mix of knowledge and skills and compassion. You have to be a really good communicator because it's not just all enforcement. You can't go around with a big stick telling people what to do because people don't like that. There's a lot of sharing of information, letting people know what expectations are around how they're going to own their dog now, and then helping them do that, and then ultimately enforcing it.
Wow. And so do you just automatically go to these bans that you know are there, or do you hear about an issue that a band is having and go? Like, is it something where you hear a report about something that draws you to a community, or is it that you have sort of on a map designated areas where you know these communities are, and you just sort of have a routine visitation that you do?
Yeah. It's more like that. So
okay.
When we started this work 21 years ago, we reached out to communities and asked if anybody needed help, and these communities came forward and said, yes, we do need help. And so we've been working there ever since. So
Wow.
I do consult with communities across Canada, and I do work with groups who are working in other communities. But as far as running on the ground vet services in particular, well, even rehoming, any of that community specific, the number of times that I go to these communities, these are the 9 that I work in, that IFAW works in, and anybody else, yes, I'm happy to, like we were talking about before, get on Zoom. We can develop bylaws on Zoom. We can have meetings on Zoom. I can run a program on Zoom. But I really try to get communities to access local help. There's no point, I mean, you know how big Canada is. There is no point me trying to run clinics on the West Coast when this job is really about access 24/7. Your phone goes 24/7. Community members are texting you 24/7, and you need to be able to honestly help them, not just talk to them. You need to be able to say, okay, I'll be there. It'll take me 2 days, but I will come and we'll do this thing. Or you've had a distemper outbreak. Okay, I'll get the team together and we'll do it. We'll do a distemper vaccination clinic. So it wouldn't be fair to communities. So I really do try to get them to hook up. And it's not just with groups. I mean, I tell people when they phone, usually, again, they tell me there's too many dogs. And then they want vet services. And so we go through, talking about that, because again, that's usually not the real issue. But I also tell them, get the phone book out. I mean, when we used to have phone books, get the phone book out, look at all the vets locally. And that might be 4 hours, maybe it's 10 hours, maybe it's 1 hour, but you want to be setting up a relationship with service providers that will help you. So this shouldn't always fall to NGOs and animal welfare groups to provide this. Sustainability is about tapping into those resources that really already exist.
Right. But probably a lot
and there are a lot of vets don't even know that problems exist.
Right. Yeah.
In communities an hour away, 10 hours. So, and that's that really great thing. The more people that understand and not just understand the superficial, there's too many dogs, but the real, who want to be involved with a different culture, who want to be culturally appropriate, who want to take reconciliation into their work, who want to really, really not just take their craft into a community, but really understand where that community is and to really help that community. I mean, that's amazing to find those people, and they're out there and they just don't even know that somebody could use their help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's amazing. So creating a network of all around country, because I was going to say, I mean, Canada's gigantic. That's a lot of coverage you need to do. It's really amazing. It's amazing. So
it is amazing. And I feel really lucky because it really does meld my interest in, marginalized communities, because I have worked on other IFA projects around the world. So, but certainly Indigenous communities in Canada, and my interest in dogs. So it's been, I feel really lucky.
That's fantastic. Is there an issue also in these communities with wild animal populations that you have to deal with?
No.
Like polar bears and stuff like that?
No.
No.
Polar bears are often at their camps. So a lot of community members have camps outside the community. So it depends where the community is. If the community is coastal, then they may have polar bear issues. But these communities that IFA works in, they are very remote. They are in the wilderness, but they are not set up like a rural community. They are set up like a town site. So you don't have great swaths of property. It's not like there's a house and then half a kilometer away there's a house. Right. It is a house right next to a house, right next to a house, and then there's the school, and then there's the band office. So sometimes you do get wolves coming into the communities. They will kill dogs if dogs, particularly if they're tied up. Bears occasionally, but really wildlife is not an issue. And I think part of it is the way the communities are set up, that they really are town sites.
Right. How do you get to these places? Do you if they're so remote, like how do you get there?
Yeah, I drive. I drive. When we first started this work, we would fly. I always drive. I like to have control of where I am. I don't need to be on a plane schedule. I can take all my equipment. Even if I go up for a meeting, so in the beginning I might fly up for some meetings and then, doing a dog survey while I was up there and going door to door and talking to owners. But then what would happen is somebody would say, "Can you take my dog?" Or "My dog is sick." So I wouldn't have any of my supplies, my first aid supplies that I could do anything with. They have a community vaccination program, so I'm a community vaccinator, so I wouldn't have my vaccinations. So I couldn't do that. And then I couldn't fly the dog. So now I love it. I have an IFA van. It's amazing. I have everything in there. It's like a little island unto itself. And it means too, when I go to one community, that I can pop over, 4 hours over there is another community. So I can do that. The vet team does fly, because when we do run the clinics, it's usually 10 days to 2 weeks. So they fly into a community, then we use vans to drive between the communities, and then they fly out, because they can't afford that 2 days driving up and 2 days driving back.
Yeah. Is one of the things that you do training either the dog person or other people in the community to do things like first aid, like just general sort of veterinary care that you don't need a real specialized training in? Yeah.
And historically, more so than now, as the job has become more formalized, and because again there is a community under the agriculture ministry, there's a community vaccinator program. So those people tend to be interested in dogs, and so those people tend to build that knowledge on their own more so. And a lot of the times the community vaccinator is not necessarily a community member. They may be a nurse, or they may be a teacher. And, it's funny, if you read a dog first aid book, it tells you what to do. So the dog, has a wound on its leg. So you do this, you do this, you do this. The last step is always go to the vet. And then you read the next thing. And it's like, a dog has been impaled. Do this, do this, do that. Go to a vet. A dog has eaten something that you don't know what it is. Do this, go to a vet. And so it always makes me kind of smile, because first aid is great, but I always say to people, you don't have the luxury of going to the vet.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to do this step, this step, this step, this step. And you know what? I've had people there was somebody, they had a 12-inch gash on their dog, and they sewed that dog up with a needle and thread.
Wow.
No pain meds, no antibiotics. And that, when she brought the dog to the clinic, you couldn't even tell.
Wow.
So there's a lot of self-sufficiency just by nature of how community members live, how they live traditionally, and still how they live. They have to be, they don't have access to all sorts of services, not just around dogs, but any services that we have that we take for granted.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it must be just an adventure every day for you.
It's an adventure. I love it. It's
Yeah.
amazing. And it's actually one of the things with COVID is you really, if you ever took your job or certain components of your job for granted, I have certainly missed the community aspect of it. I have missed networking and talking and being in the communities. And computers are great, but there is nothing that takes the place of being there, especially when you are a community-based program and you're not doing the community part. It's
right.
I really miss it.
I'm sure you do, because you must know everybody personally that that you're seeing. Well, I think one of the things that I really love about the International Fund for Animal Welfare is the way they prioritize finding a solution that's going to work for both the animals and the people. To find a way to coexist and to prosper together. I think it's really the key. It's the only way to do it that's going to be able to go forward into the future. So I love that.
I agree.
Yeah. Education is a big thing. And I love that you've come on to talk to us and let us know that this is something that's going on, and maybe some young people listening might follow in your footsteps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's like anything. You don't even know what is available to do in your life as far as your career goes. And there are so many interesting things in the animal field in particular. I mean, it's certainly an interest of yours, and it's certainly an interest of mine, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's endless. Yeah, I think it's amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with? Any other information we haven't covered that you think is important?
I think, and I did touch on it, I just think that anybody who's working in communities, whether you're working in tribal communities in the States, that we have to recognize the history and the complex historical relationships that we have with people and our role in up here colonialism. And we have to do this work respectfully, and we can be part of the process, but these are not our lives to create the answers for. And we just to be really mindful of where people are at and respect where they're at and embrace the differences rather than looking for people to look like you and sound like you and own their dog like you.
Right. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Well, it reminds me when I was growing up, my mom and dad would let our dog out every morning to do his rounds, his rounds in the neighborhood. And he would go off for like an hour or so, and then he'd come back and get breakfast and thinking about that nowadays it really kind of blows my mind that was sort of the routine. Yes. And nobody ever said anything about it.
No. And my dad, their family did the same. And then, sometimes, at some point the dog would get picked up and then they didn't even bother and go and get their dog. So I think what people forget, because sometimes, we're born into, let's say, how we own dogs now in the mainstream. But what you and I are talking about isn't that long ago.
No.
The people didn't actually worry about the safety of their dog when they opened the door. They didn't spay or neuter their dog. They didn't worry about what the dog was doing or where they were pooping or anything.
No.
It's not that long ago. And so we have to be, again, really mindful that we are bringing people into an arc that we're already over there.
Right.
Yeah. So I always say, you got to give communities 50 years. Took us 50 years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that's been proven, hasn't it? Takes like 40 years for a new idea to be accepted.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then implementing it and stuff, that's another decade. So
Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting, Jan, and I just think it's fantastic what you're doing. And I really appreciate you coming on to tell us about it.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, carry on the good work, and hopefully we'll get a chance to speak again sometime.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right. Well, have a
All
good
right.
rest of
Thanks,
the day.
Jenny.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.